Welcome in this new video where I will show you a great attacking game and I will teach you a lot of attacking principles as well as some strategical concepts. So keep on watching. And here the move d4 and met by the move d6. All fine, because my opponent will get a pawn in the center in the end. As often with the King's Indian defense, you first make sure the bishop is developed. Maybe castle also first, but sooner or later you will strike with the move c5 or e5 and get a pawn in the center. And at the same time, you give your opponent a lot of room to get a great center, like I have right now. My opponent goes for the knight development, makes a lot of sense, and then often it's met with the move e5, and after d5, the knight goes here to a nice outpost, but I develop my knight first, and here the move e5, bishop here. Look at my position, already quite strong with a lot of centralization of the pieces. I wouldn't really mind if my opponent were to take, because then I take back and I have the Moroxi bind over here with the c4 pawn and the e4 pawn. And yeah, this bishop always eyes on the knight, which is completely fine for me. Instead, my opponent goes for the development, and here I go to f3 to prevent the knight from coming here and taking away one of the key pieces in the position, the black squared bishop. And that's an important middle game principle. Make sure to keep your bishop pair. And also setting up for moves like g4, h4, and a great attack also after knight to g3. My opponent castles, and here queen to d2, setting up the battery, maybe trading off this bishop at some point. And here my opponent plays the move a6. And I have a strong center, and then you really want to counterattack even with b5 here or f5, maybe c5 at some point as well, but make sure to get something going against this great center. c6 also looks like a very logical move here. I play the move d5, locking the center, especially as I already have some nice development in. And yeah, b5 wouldn't work because I could simply take it right now. And now my opponent makes a small strategical mistake by moving the rook here, because the center is already locked. And yeah, this rook will look at this pawn for the moves to come. Instead, you would like to move back your knight and go for f5. That is a very thematical approach of the King's Indian. So not a good move, and I play the move g4 right away, setting up the attack. Look at this. The knight will come here, the bishop might go here, castling, rook here, and basically destroying my opponent. That's the plan. And my opponent plays a good move here, h5, immediately countering my attack. And yeah, taking is an option, but you can defend it like this. And this is quite hard to break through, as knight g3, and then the knight will come here. And yeah, it's hard for me to really make a next advance in my attack. Instead, I decided to lock it up, because now the knight has to go back here, and I can enforce this defense, and the knight is out of the game, the bishop is out of the game as well, so I have a strategical edge in this position. And then the question is how to continue here. Of course, I could play the move h4, basically defending my g4 pawn, but it's already defended twice by the bishop and the queen. And often here f6 or f5 is a move, also trying to threaten the f3 pawn. That's also why this rook should have been still in the f-file. And I want to get my bishop here and reroute my knight to the d3 square. It can support also the c pawn push at some point, for example. So I start rerouting my knight, and here my opponent plays the move f6. I takes back, and the king side is opening up for me and for my attack. First, I need to be careful of this pawn, so I decide to defend it with bishop to e2. And you might think, okay, well, now black can give a check to prevent me from castling. But that's okay in these positions, and this is a very thematical approach. After this check, I go here, and my king wants to go to c2, the knight goes here, and then make room for the rook, as my king is very safe on this side of the board, because most pieces are concentrated on the other side of the board. And b5 is not really a threat, because I can simply take it. I have enough pieces to defend it with, and the king is quite safe on the queen side, believe me. Here my opponent wanted to reroute the knight. Basically, he didn't know what to do, because here the knight doesn't have a future, because he's looking at his own pawn, and you don't want to push this pawn for sure. It cannot go here. Maybe he thought, okay, I will go here and then enforce this, but remember, I was rerouting this knight to d3, and if you now would go here, then I will simply pick up a pawn, and you're too late with this move. and I can drop back. So that doesn't work. Knight here, and strategically I'm much better and I have a lot of time to set up my attack. The queen goes back, I make room for the rook and bring my king to safety, and my opponent does the same, and look at this. The rooks are active, my bishop is really good, queen behind it, maybe f4 at some point, opening up space for the bishop as well. This will be a devastating attack. I will show you how it's done. Here, knight to f6, bring in an attacker. Okay, sure, but we can double up the rooks, and that's what I'm doing. Bring in another offender. c5, just ignore it. Okay, double up once more. This pawn is now being protected, and this knight is bound to the protection of the king's position. And how to continue here? Well, if you just keep on defending, I will make moves and make sure to bring in more pieces, and I will simply win. So in these positions, it's important that you create an attack as well, or at least some counterattack, so your opponent needs to react and make some moves and defend. And that's what my opponent does. Great move, b5. Attacking this pawn, maybe going here, maybe the bishop will join, maybe the rook's behind it. At some point, making sure you have a counterattack. But I'm not too worried about taking, because then you have a double pawn. At some point I might be able to take it as well. So I'm not too worried about it, and I simply slide back my king. Maybe not the best approach. King b1 would have been even better, just going to the corner of the board. But I thought at some point, well, if this file opens up, then maybe it's not favorable. And being on the a1 square, then maybe at some point the bishop might be strong after a move like f4, but that's way ahead. So that's why I went to c1, also fine. And what is a good move here? Well, I was looking at this square. Wouldn't it be nice to have a knight here? And this knight isn't doing much. My opponent managed to maneuver his pawns so that this knight is not doing much. So I was like, okay, what if I would be able to maneuver my knight over here? Of course, this bishop protects it, but that was my plan. Knight to f2, and here the rook goes to the other side of the board, setting up some threats over here. But it's also defended, right? And this rook also supports in the defense after these pieces are moving. And I slide in my bishop, setting up the battery and the pin on the queen of the knight. So making sure I get some attack in. Queen moves aside, and then the question is how to continue. I would have loved to get my knight here, because now there's a fork also threatening, but yeah, this bishop is protecting it. I don't really want to lock up this position with the h-pawn, because that might also be a good defender for my opponent, because my own pieces are also blocked by the h-pawn, and I want to bring in more pieces, so I thought the move f4 is very strong. Opening up the position, also for the bishop, so I need to be very careful, but opening up the position for sure. My opponent takes, and I take back with the queen, setting up another pin. And my opponent moves out of the pin right away, but that was not the best move. Can I reinforce that pin? Yes, queen to h4, and forcing the battery on the knight. It is defended twice already, but it's not easy to defend it 3 times. And maybe this knight will come in, maybe a rook over here. There's a lot of things being threatened. But my opponent, also a bit in time pressure, decided to bring in another defender horizontally. It might help at some point. But this was not a good move, because now I have a winning blow on the board. Do you see it? What will be a good move? And how do we approach these situations? Well, I have these rooks threatening the bishop, but there's a pawn in between. I have this battery going on. I have also some play here, and I have this pin. Maybe this knight will also join at some point. This bishop is aiming here. So first thing you look at is, can you give a check? I can't give a check. Can I take things? Well, if I take the knight, then you can simply take back with the bishop, threatening my queen. But is there another thing you can take? Yes, take the pawn. And you cannot take with the knight, because then the queen hangs. So that's not a good option. If you take back with the pawn, well, then I can take like this. And you cannot take back with the bishop, because this would be a checkmate, right? The rooks are here. There's nothing that can be in between. Checkmate. So you have to take back with the queen. And then you can simply take the bishop here. And yes, material-wise it's almost equal, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against 6, but the king's position of my opponent is super weak, and I bring in the queen with a check. My opponent goes back, and I could have taken this pawn, but it's a bit slow. And then rook e8. My opponent gets some activity in, So I decided to play the move e5 right away, way more active. And after rook e8 here, I can still take and then easily move forward. And my opponent cannot take it because this hangs the rook. So my opponent decided to set up a counterattack over here. Maybe take on b2 at some point and give me some issues after taking this pawn. But I decide to ignore it and simply give a check first, and now bringing the knight, attacking this pawn once more, and my opponent goes for the counterattack, setting up the bishop here and preventing some retreating squares for my king. I take the pawn and my opponent takes here, threatening to take here, so I need to be very careful here. I am attacking, my opponent is attacking as well. But the thing is, this knight cannot be easily attacked and is such a great defender of my position, as you will see later. I give a check and trade the strong bishop, as now I can simply, after the check, start moving my pawns. My opponent takes the b2 pawn, and look, like I said, the knight is defending the a2 pawn, the b1 square, so there's no real checks here, and the knight cannot be attacked easily as well, and I decide to move my pawn forward, attacking the knight. Yeah, and taking here to give a check here wouldn't work, because then I would simply take the knight and yeah, you simply have to take the queen. So knight to g6, and here there's a lot of good moves, but I simply decide to start promoting these pawns and there's nothing black can do. Maybe if you take here, then just simply d7 and yeah, maybe you have a check, but the knight will simply defend, and the rooks are simply not strong enough to overpower this knight, and yeah, I will simply promote my pawns later, and this is where my opponent resigned. So guys, keep these opening, middle game and attacking principles in mind to improve your game, and see you next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Bye bye.